Welcome to the Community Living Education Project's Sharing Possibilities for Community Connections Learning event. The Community Living Education Project, also known as CLEP, is a program through the Rutgers School of Public Health. CLEP is committed to providing individual guidance, mentoring, and education regarding community living resources for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the state of New Jersey. The CLEP team, many who are family members themselves, can serve as a bridge for families whose loved ones may be seeking residential supports outside of the family's home. Today's webinar, Strategies to Improve Organization, Focus and Planning, Executive Functioning Supports for Community Living, is being presented by Dr. Bianca Coleman, representing Behavior Therapy Associates. To ensure the highest sound quality possible, all of today's attendees will be muted during today's event. To interact with the host or presenter, please use your question and answer button on the bottom of your screen. It will say Q&A. Topic-specific questions will be addressed as long as time allows. For consideration to all of our attendees, we encourage you to keep your questions as general as possible. At this time, I would like to welcome today's presenter, Dr. Bianca Coleman. Dr. Coleman, welcome.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for joining me, everyone, and thank you to Melanie and Rutgers for welcoming me to this presentation. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak further on such a highly valued and intricate topic. So the focus for today is going to be on executive functioning and how we can modify our supports that we're currently using in more structured settings to allow for more levels of independence and promoting independence within the community and for considerations for community living, vocational settings, and independent home living. I'm going to provide an overview today of what we're going to be discussing. The topic of executive functioning is broad and vast, as some of you may be more familiar than others. I'm going to gear this discussion towards as many different audiences as possible, taking into consideration the needs of a variety of individuals' functioning levels. I would like to provide some strategies and supports for providers and for parents and guardians. I'd also like to provide some avenues for direction and exploration for advocates, and then for individuals who are self-advocates as well. We're going to begin our discussion by discussing challenges related to executive functioning difficulties, some suggestions for strategies and supports. I'd like to take a bit of time at the end to talk about thinking beyond standard assessment of skills. A lot of executive functioning skills are often evaluated further using highly structured and rigorous means of assessment and evaluation. So taking that into mind, I do still feel like those are essential tools. I'd like to speak a little bit beyond that and broaden our scope a bit more into incorporating other areas into evaluating skills. Then some additional areas for consideration will be presented. I'd like to just very broadly wrap up our talk with some general intervention guidelines when considering intervening for executive functioning skills. And this may include a team of individuals which are providing supports for an individual in the community or about to transition into the community or a supported work environment or vocational setting. And this might also include areas in which self-advocates and advocates can encourage further support and assistance from the individuals who are involved in the day-to-day ongoings and support systems and networks for the individuals with developmental disabilities or autism spectrum disorder. And then we're going to hopefully have some time at the end for some, as Melanie mentioned, very general questions. I can absolutely try to hone and be as specific as possible in some situations, but understanding that the umbrella of executive functioning and functioning individuals with whom we're discussing today is vast. So I hope to be able to provide some insight that you can globally apply. All right, so getting into the basics of executive functioning. What we know about executive functioning is often compartmentalized into these, broad categories that we know about from assessment and goals and things like that. But I'd like to really break down the skills a bit further into different components that we can consider and evaluate as they might appear in individuals who are older, who are transitioning into the community, and things of that nature. Executive functioning skills really encompass so many essential skills of daily living. So nearly everything that we do really does incorporate an area of executive functioning. When we're considering the population that we are discussing today, what this might look like is having the skills to obtain a job, maintain a job, more intricate personal relationship building, maintaining these relationships, sustaining a clean and a safe home and environment, completing large home projects. So this is inside and outside of the home, shopping, paying bills, transportation, making healthy choices about yourself, your well-being, cooking and cleaning up food, taking medications, contributing to the community, caring for loved ones possibly. And when we consider what executive functioning deficits might look like, they're often misinterpreted or misconstrued and might be considered the person as being perhaps disorganized or they're lazy or things like that, when in fact there are significant challenges that might exist within one or multiple of these facets of executive functioning. So these are broad abilities that we're going to discuss, and you're going to notice throughout our discussion that there is a bit of overlap between some of these areas. Planning might affect some goal setting abilities, and lack of inhibition might affect the goal setting abilities. Our ability to self-monitor might in fact affect our attention and vice versa. So I'll try to kind of hone in a little bit on each area, but then giving you avenues to be able to generalize the information to other areas of concern as well. So why the intense focus on executive functioning skills in particular? I understand, being a professional in the field and understanding that there may be professionals in this audience or care providers that have a vast knowledge of the skills for evaluation and for goal setting and things like that. We have a variety of skills that we really want to focus in on, that we want to make sure are solid, the foundations are solid before an individual transitions into the community. After that transition period, there might also be a lot of other concerns which might take precedence. So we have a bevy of skills to really hone in on and to ensure being supported. But executive functioning skills, the reason why I am encouraging some additional intervention and evaluation in this area is that we want to really be able to ensure that individuals moving into the community or other aspects of life are having good roots in safety and self-esteem, that they're able to live healthier lives. We're going to see this theme of independence repeated throughout my presentation today, but by ensuring that executive functioning skills are well supported, we're ensuring that independence is able to be achieved in a meaningful way for the individual. I also want to focus our attention to self-advocacy skills. Having executive functioning skills that are well supported also supports self-advocacy and the ability to be able to make that skill at the forefront as the individual moves into different facets of life. And then also in terms of ability to participate throughout the day, self-regulation. That's an important skill that's targeted by executive functioning skills. By targeting executive functioning skills, we're anticipating those areas of need. And this is all to ensure a smoother transition. We're moving from a highly structured environment and a good amount of supports to a less structured environment. A lot more unpredictable events, things might occur that are not necessarily a part of a daily schedule. So we just want to make sure we're preparing for those things. So first, I'm going to start by talking about abilities broadly. You'll notice that what we're really going to focus in on is what these skills look like in individuals with whom we're discussing today, and then what some strategies and supports would be helpful to make sure that we're addressing concerns or limitations, difficulties in these areas, and supporting skills further as we move more and more towards independence. So the first area I'd like to discuss is attention. When we think about executive functioning skills, this is often the first thing that comes to mind. So at the forefront here, we're talking about the ability to attend to a situation in spite of distractibility, in spite of fatigue, in spite of boredom. It's overall difficulty maintaining concentration. And inability to attend in a larger or distracting environment, starting and stopping multiple things at once, all these things that come with transitions into the community, transitions into vocational settings or a supported work environment. There's a lot more going on at once, a lot more things that are happening sensory-wise, a lot more things that are happening with regard to input that's coming in within the form of verbalization, sounds, smells, sights, things like that. So this, again, can look like engagement in off-task behaviors. Conversationally or socially, an individual who has challenges with attention may interrupt or change topics frequently. There's a general disorganization that kind of comes with challenges with attention and executive functioning. The organization can look like the physical manifestation of disorganization, can also present with regard to different speech patterns and inability to attend socially in larger settings, being able to attend to conversations, ongoing streams of consciousness in regard to how they're interacting with the environment. So that can look different in that way. Asking for things to be repeated often or losing track. Things like that are more commonly seen in areas of difficulty with attention. So again, for strategies and supports, I'm going to kind of speak broadly with regard to what might be helpful in these situations. And then at the end, I kind of want to summarize some additional supports that would help with this as well too. So we'll revisit the attention component. In terms of strategies and supports that would be helpful for attention difficulties, overall, planning a schedule for the individual to go through the day, or yourself, if you're an individual who is self-advocating or planning out your day and you're noting your executive functioning challenges, to planning a schedule so that activities requiring the more focused concentration are during periods of the day when that attention might be at its highest. We're going to talk about assessing and managing challenging behaviors and challenging features of executive functioning deficits later on. So part of knowing when the individual can have more focused attention, or in yourself, knowing when you are able to sit and focus for longer periods of time and what those periods of time look like, is going to be important in developing this intervention. Providing a quiet location for an individual to work in the home environment, if there's more of a focus of sustained tasks like paying bills or completing an activity that's required in the home with regard to intense focus and concentration and more prolonged time spent doing the task. Again, I would recommend in the home environment, this is mirrored as well. Attention cues, things like visual supports in the environment to cue attention and focus, whether it be to next steps, which we'll talk about more when it comes to planning and goal setting. So attention cues in the structured environment, things like color coding, making transitions very clear, putting time parameters on tasks which are going to be requiring more work and focus for a longer amount of time. Sometimes that in and of itself is helpful for redirecting the attention, because it's understood that that attention only has to be sustained for that set amount of time. Things like managing household chores with lists or paying bills and things like that, tasks for the day, help sustain attention, again, for shorter periods of time. Another dimension of executive functioning that is really going to be something that, especially for individuals with autism spectrum disorder, can be challenging and affect many facets, is cognitive flexibility. So cognitive flexibility more or less refers to the ability to think flexibly and be able to alternate attention to solve complex or novel tasks. Things like selective attention might feed into this overall ability. So an individual may have difficulty with transitions or times between tasks. There might be a hyper focus on subjects of focus or attention or work, or areas of interest. So this hyper focus might cause or manifest as more of a rigidity or an inability to kind of move past. Dealing with novel or unforeseen circumstances is something that often presents as a significant problem for individuals transitioning into community living or supported work environments or less structure. That plan for how to react, what that reaction looks like, who's going to support me in that reaction. That's oftentimes very difficult and presents a good amount of challenge when it comes to solving after the fact. So interventions to best support cognitive flexibility are going to be more of those antecedent interventions, those planning ahead and rehearsing interventions. Task-specific difficulties might be more or less manifesting as problems with changing an approach to a project or to an activity if the first time that you're incorporating this into the daily routine is not successful. Difficulties shifting from one task to another. And then conversationally, it's going to manifest as difficulties generating ideas, novel conversational topic, handling novel issues that might come up socially. So in terms of higher order social interaction, this is a skill that's going to greatly impact that as an individual moves towards exploring new groups of socialization, such as work groups or dating or novel friend groups when they're perhaps in a different setting than a school environment. The structure and predictability we know is often important in supporting individuals with ASD. So this is something we want to especially pay focus and attention to when working with individuals or when supporting individuals, or if you are an individual on the spectrum, just being aware of the levels of cognitive flexibility and the challenges that may be presented in separate settings. So as I mentioned, the role play of the novel situations, the potential issues that may arise, the discussions about that, and then rehearsing or giving scripts on how to act is going to be helpful in providing a toolbox, not necessarily the specific tool, but a toolbox of options for an individual to go to if they are encountering these novel situations, options for how to plug in these solutions to the problems that may arise. It's going to be difficult, of course, to be able to anticipate every situation that may arise, but the more options that we provide, the better equipped the individual would be, or they may find themselves able to be more comfortable in those situations. If a situation arises and cognitive flexibility is producing a large amount of anxiety or anger or externalizing behaviors, perhaps teaching in advance some self-calming or grounding strategies to respond to a stressful event is going to be beneficial as well. This is if needed. It's not necessarily going to apply to everybody, but I think in our day-to-day lives, everyone can say that we need to take a moment and step away sometimes if things become overly stressful, if a new challenge is thrown on an already full plate. So in general, teaching a grounding exercise or how to step away or a self-calming strategy is going to be helpful in anticipating these problems if they are occurring. Identifying areas to go outside of the immediate area in this situation is often part of this process. Again, visual cues and reminders, especially as we're learning and acquiring some of these new role play scenarios, some of these tools for our toolbox, it's going to be important to help remind and repeat some of the strategies, even if there's not direct instruction that can be provided. And as we know, in these settings, it's often difficult to provide direct instruction in the moment. Additional assistance, if it can't be instructed directly, can often be found in looking to the environment. If that's a roommate or a peer buddy, or someone to go to in the supported work environment or the vocational setting or the job setting. Identifying people is often helpful in giving another tool for the toolbox. And discussing or having cues ready for the changes in the events, like going through the day, planning out the day, and encountering various things that could occur and how you can problem solve towards that. Another dimension of executive functioning, which is important to highlight, is the planning skill. So the ability to sequence steps out. This can be a bigger, broader picture, like a long-term work assignment or a month of, let's say, expenses or to-dos in the supported living or work setting. So this is really focused on the ability to evaluate over time a task, strategy, a problem, reach an answer. This can also be planning out social interactions and conversational cues. So again, we're seeing a little bit of blending and overlap with the effects. So socially, this can be planning out a conversation, what to do during a more prolonged interaction. Sometimes deficits in planning can often look like motivational issues. So, whether it's just a hesitance to get started because an individual might not know physically, like, where do I start with this project, or cognitively how to start this project. Scaffolded supports or using chaining approaches are often helpful to provide really the least amount of assistance and encourage the most amount of independence in this situation. Following the first couple of steps to get started and then fading out, providing a visual cue or a written cue on how to get started with a task, and then allowing independence after that for them to go to some of those tools in their toolbox. This can also manifest as a phenomenon known as time blindness. So just unaware of the passing of time and not really being able to budget or plan accordingly with how much time will be devoted to a task. This can look like absorption in a leisure time activity rather than a focus on getting household tasks done, not allowing enough time in the day to be able to accomplish, shopping in the community, travel time, paying bills, and then making it to work on time, things of that nature. It can often manifest itself in the form of just really forgetting some of those essential features, aspects of ADLs. I'm allowing time for myself to get up, but I might not be able to allow enough time for a shower and then to be able to have enough time to get to where I'm going on time. Some strategies and supports which are often helpful in this area include a good amount of visuals. Calendars, check-off lists, daily schedules, any kind of organizer or template for a task that allows a skill to be broken down further to assure that all the components are A, accounted for, and then B, if it's a time budgeting issue specifically, that there's enough time allotted to complete each item. Having someone to be able to go over, at least initially or the first few times the skill is worked on, to verbally review steps and to kind of schedule and plan things out in advance will help provide that initial coaching opportunity to allow for greater independence as the person encounters that skill more often. For individuals or advocates, I'm going to kind of wrap this up at the end, but I really want to encourage, as I'm mentioning all of these skills, it's going to be important to get the input from the individual to see specifically where those areas of need are going to be. If they're able to provide an overall guideline for what has to be done, but maybe struggle with deciding how much time should be allotted or what their day is going to look like on less structured days, that might be more room for intervention or support during that time. In the home or in the environment in which the individual is working or interacting frequently, providing structure and containment for things that materials and things like that. So things like bins, folders, to house items which are required for each task is also going to be helpful, and a nice antecedent strategy, which can be done in advance. There's also a bevy, and I have some linked at the end of the presentation, of web-based apps, Alexa functions, Google Home tasks that can be utilized to provide reminders throughout the day, steps. It can provide verbal prompts. There's really a ton of great technological features which can be a benefit to help throughout the day if something like something visually, something posted is less preferred or not needed in some cases. So I encourage you to explore, depending on the functioning of the individual with whom you're supporting or your own levels of concern, to explore these other options further. All right, our next area to take a deeper look at is the area of goal setting. Fairly self-explanatory, I know, but basically what we're looking at here is the ability to not only set goals for the future and in the longer sense of looking at what's needed and how to go about it, but really just to identify what those goals are moving forward. Having the ability to take a look at where we are versus where we're going to be and the steps in between is not something that everyone is able to do easily because of the more abstract nature. The various decision tree steps that can be taken to get from A to B could be vast in nature. So this skill is really getting through the goal from identification to completion. Teaching using tools and techniques to improve overall monitoring throughout each step of the goal process, such as checklists or repetitive tasks, can often be helpful with that. It's also important to really be mindful of and teaching to the process of self-review and analysis of ourselves in the moment. Self-monitoring strategies to check in to see where we are with accomplishing that goal, monitoring the timeline for the goal, things of that nature. Those things are often helpful. In terms of general guidance and support in the community, having frequent check-ins to be able to touch base on the progress of a goal and provide feedback on assuring an appropriate direction moving forward from the goal is going to be very helpful. Again, I want to look at strategies that may support things like chaining or providing a first or a last clear step for the individual to follow as kind of a way to scaffold supports and provide additional guidance. Breaking goals down to smaller, more accomplishable tasks is also helpful in terms of setting an individual up to have reinforcement for yourself, breaking your goal down, self-reinforcement, making sure they're able to accomplish each step, or you're able to get through each step before moving to that next step. Sometimes there are things in terms of, building confidence and building independence. Sometimes having an individual help with rating the performance or tracking the goal with more specific objectives or rubrics is helpful too for encouraging different types of skill acquisition along the way to meeting that goal. Modeling or walking through the steps, again, we're going to see a repeated theme of rehearsal is often helpful for in allowing visualization of the goal, greater understanding of the steps and things that are needed, and things of that nature. All right, inhibition, another hot button topic when we're thinking about executive functioning difficulties. So the notion of inhibition is really geared towards, for the individual, the ability to stop and think before acting, resisting the urge to respond to distractors in the environment. If you're in the community, the resistance to, really making sure that we're blocking out irrelevant stimuli and focusing on goals like safety, or for the individual who is maybe doing a bit more shopping or independent budgeting, resisting the urge to really being more spending and allocating our funds where it might not be of benefit. Conversationally and socially, inhibition might look like some additional blurting, some interjecting, a frequent change of topic completely. So not really thinking about the context of what's going on before providing a conversational cue or interjecting. Again, kind of in terms of reinforcing ourselves, budgeting, selecting a more immediate consequence or reward versus holding out for the delayed gratification aspect. And that becomes things in the home like, meal planning, and in the work environment, doing the task to minimal completion versus to full completion. And then, of course, impulsivity with actions and decision making. Some strategies and supports which are often helpful in a work environment or in a vocational environment would be to minimize the environmental distractions. Having a persistent issue with executive functioning throughout the academic career lends itself to certain supports and strategies that you would use in a classroom setting. Some of these strategies can be generalized to the work setting, to the home setting. So things that you would immediately think of, such as limiting excessive stimuli. If you are an individual or you are working with an individual who is overly sensitive to noise, to distractions, to smells, really setting the environment up for success and making sure that those are limited to the greatest extent possible. Using clear and concise language is often very beneficial when providing multiple step directions and activities. It works from a point of minimizing anxiety and distress also. So that's something to consider when either outlining steps for an individual to follow. If you're developing visual strategies and supports, making them very clear and concise and limiting the amount of steps depending on the individual is also helpful. If there is a situation in which you can anticipate that an individual may be more likely to be impulsive, encouraging some stop and think strategies, or at least providing a model for a decision tree, which might be helpful in making those decisions in the moment versus just going to something that is either easily accessible or more easily followed. It's also important to consider external sources of reinforcement. And making sure that we're cueing for expected behaviors in the moment. So if you're setting up the day, you're setting an expectation for things that have to be done. You're setting an expectation for things that you want to do or to share. If those things are put from the outset as cues, that's often beneficial in keeping things more on track. All righty. Another essential executive functioning skill is self-monitoring. So self-monitoring, the way it may manifest as a challenge or a difficulty for an individual transitioning into the community, might manifest as an inability to just be able to kind of check in with yourself and recognizing what's going on. If it's a situation in which it's more likely to be a high stress environment, if there are social skills deficits, or more of a specific attention component, that could be manifesting itself in the form of something in the work environment, and ability to stay on track and focus on the task at hand. This could also look like difficulties identifying and appropriate strategies in the moment to problem solve. Really, to conceptualize, it's a difficulty standing back and taking an overall view of the situation versus more of an intense focus. So really assessing their own performance, assessing your own progress. It's a metacognition deficit or area of concern. How is the individual at thinking about thinking versus where that cognitive inflexibility may come in and really encourage a hyper focus on a select area. So difficulty with self-monitoring might also come in the form of assessing for overall accuracy and completion of tasks, completion of daily activities in the home, difficulty generalizing strategies from one setting to another. If I'm learning about something that's helping me in a work environment, maybe the difficulty at home could be influenced by some of those strategies. Really, the inability to recognize that that could also be a supported strategy. And challenges with time management, of course. That's a repeated theme that we're seeing across all of these areas. So some strategies that could be helpful in this situation if you have an individual who has challenges with self-monitoring is the extent to which it's appropriate and possible check-ins or feedback regarding their progress in a given situation, a situation that may be more challenging. For individuals who are supporting persons in the community, this could come in the form of checking in during more of like a time sampling. So checking in during a time in which you know is more challenging and providing that feedback whenever possible. In order to keep more focus on the task at hand, again, this recurrent theme of visuals or checklists for common tasks is often helpful. When we're thinking about self-monitoring, there's also that antecedent intervention piece, that planning ahead piece, providing an opportunity for a dialogue to occur with either, a peer buddy, a vocational coach, a parent or guardian, a significant other, to have a period where they are able to evaluate their ability in the moment, evaluate some decisions that might be coming up, just a general discussion period. And again, these should all be scaffolded accordingly to the needs of the individual. Of course, positive reinforcement for self-reinforcement for making progress with regard to a goal, utilizing strategies that are difficult or challenging to utilize on a day-to-day basis. That's often just helpful for solidifying a skill as it occurs. Things like modeling and role play are often helpful for anticipated difficult or challenging situations. And again, revisiting the coping or the de-escalation strategies component. A large part about self-monitoring is making sure that we are maintaining ourselves at this place of homeostasis, this place of baseline in which we're able to be more productive, we're able to be more independent, and we're able to be happier in general. So that self-monitoring is making sure that our barometer for recognizing that we are straying outside of that zone, or we need a redirective component, or we need to get back on track, that's occurring. So these strategies to help us get us back to that point are also important to encourage along the way. So I'm going to take a little mid-discussion break to provide a few resources that can be very broadly applied to anyone, different skill and functioning levels. Some of these visuals that I'm referring to. It's going to be very challenging to make a one-size-fits-all visual resource for everybody, but these are just some things to just consider for the individual you are supporting, or if you are the individual themselves. What's going to be helpful for keeping things on track in terms of self-monitoring, in terms of planning, and in terms of goal setting. So general spreadsheets like this, or if you're using them in that fashion, or posted kind of calendars or schedules or agendas, are often helpful for things from meal planning to chores, to paying bills, anything of that nature. So something as simple and concise as, a meal schedule, sitting down at the start of the week with a significant other, a parent or guardian, a coach, and a professional is going to be helpful for purchasing meals, planning meals, times of the day, things of that nature. So something along these lines, or something like this, if you want to get a little bit more specific with the skill, is often helpful to keeping us on track. So things like this are focused on, ingredients and the task from start to finish. We can also take some data on independence if help was needed to, again, continuously modify our approach and ensure that independence is achieved. I think when we're considering strategies and what's being implemented, it's important to, in some form or another, keep some data on what is successful, what's helpful, and then what's not helpful as well. As more independence is achieved, we should be fading back and modifying things to be more like this. So this is a sample that a colleague of mine shared with me from TikTok, believe it or not. There are some good things that can come from TikTok. That is just a very nice, very clear example of how we can kind of budget things in a more structured way. So by really separating and categorizing where the sources of income need to be allocated, what the expected fees are going to include, and then where we can also budget for additional, whether it be more or less modifications, is often helpful in really helping with the planning aspect, is helping with the monitoring aspect, is helping with some of the planning in advance. So you can see here at the bottom, there are things, different expenses categories, and things to take into consideration. Things like this, these types of templates are readily available, but again, making sure that they're geared towards the individual's level of independence, and making sure that we're at least in some form or another kind of monitoring the progress with utilizing these independently. Okay. Also, and I should say at the end of the presentation too, I have linked a couple websites that do have some similar strategies outlined, some similar visuals outlined, so you can seek those out and modify as needed. All right, a personal favorite of mine, working memory because it encompasses so much. So when we're speaking about working memory in terms of executive functioning deficits, we're really talking about the ability to temporarily store information and then utilize it in a fashion that might be in a divided attention setting. It might be in a larger or smaller capacity setting. So working memory is really one of the most fundamental processes in learning. And if we're talking about skill acquisition, we're talking about independence. This is one in which I feel like a large amount of supports is often needed, especially when working at that first transitional period. Working memory is really going to be essential for connecting prior knowledge to the new information that's being acquired through the novel experiences that come from living in a community, from the novel problem solving that comes with living with less supports. So this is a good deal of attention and focus is needed here. Working memory deficits can manifest as more of a fluency issue, a difficulty with multiple step directions, not completing steps to completion. So you can imagine what this would look like as manifested with activities within the home, basic care and chores, things of that nature. And then in the work environment, you know, we're in a higher demand setting. This can often be highly problematic. Maintaining strategies for previously taught information, not being able to carry things over, as like I said, that lack of generalization. Again, this could possibly affect the speech and the language in terms of pragmatics, being able to hold multiple conversations at once, multiple sources of audiological information, receptive language, things of that nature. An individual could also have some challenges with paraphrasing or summarizing. So again, we're going to look for some of those more concrete strategies to organize thoughts, recording thoughts in the moment, things of that nature to help with that. Sequencing and organization is problematic too. So the practicing, the repetition is an important strategy and support to utilize here as well too. It's often helpful to, at least briefly, if you are having the opportunity to have some supported learning occurring before the situations arise, reviewing previously learned concepts and showing the individual how those can be generalized to work or affect one settings. Having the visual supports to help recall steps that may occur in lesser repeated tasks throughout the day is also helpful. Attention cues. If we are not attending to a task fully, we're not able to commit that into working memory. If it doesn't go into working memory, we're not getting it fully through the long-term memory and then committed as a foundational skill. So that attention cue as the antecedent strategy to ensuring working memory functions are occurring is highly important. Really making sure that tasks are simplified to the greatest extent possible. If you are an individual who is really struggling with the working memory component, keeping copies of notes or cheat sheets is often helpful for some of the, especially when it comes to paying bills independently, going to novel settings, things like that. Having kind of a cheat sheet or an overall guideline to review in advance, if this has been something you've been able to rehearse ahead of time, is often helpful as well too. Now, it's also important to really recognize memory strengths. So individuals with whom we work and support, often individuals with autism spectrum disorder, may have some specific sources of information, working memory, long-term memory that are really solidified and should really be considered an area of strength. Making sure that we are incorporating those areas of strength, whether it's for a specific subject area or with regard to certain activities in the community, making sure that that's incorporated to the greatest extent possible into social cues and social settings, household abilities, if it's in the form of reinforcement, really utilizing and capitalizing on that once we're able to accomplish the day-to-day tasks that are a bit more challenging, some things of that nature. Again, this is all about further personalizing, these intervention strategies and steps and making sure that we're addressing working memory as a whole. And I should also mention, since we're going to be talking about a little bit about the planning and the evaluation of these abilities, it's important to recognize that, just because an individual may be particularly skilled at one area of recalling certain details does not necessarily mean that their entire ability or the entire skill set of working memory is solidified. So making sure we're not just capturing one facet of this skill, making sure that we're really taking things into account globally, not making sweeping generalizations about abilities based upon one aspect of their ability. So I think that in terms of assessing, and I'll circle back to this shortly, it's important to take a look at skills generalized, multiple samplings of skills in different environments to be able to really make sure that a skill is solidified before we categorize it as such. Alrighty, so this is kind of where I was getting to a bit here. So in terms of thinking about assessment, I realize that some individuals who might be joining me today might be actively enrolled in or anticipating the transition currently. Some individuals might be planning for the transition to occur, thinking ahead programmatically. So these are some things to consider on both sides of the fence. But I really want to make sure that the assessment portion is being discussed as something that is critical prior to the transition, to make sure that we are really gearing goals and supports towards meaningful areas and for areas in which are more needed, rather than just covering a blanket umbrella of these are skills for the community. It's important to really hone in on those specific areas, especially the foundational areas that I had mentioned. So this is really discussion beyond the standard battery of formalized evaluations. So, I really feel very strongly that, adaptive measures and skill-based measures and vocational measures are critical, but this is kind of taking it a little bit beyond that. So there's going to be more key questions to ask and document moving forward after those evaluations have occurred. As I said, community skills-based assessments are often helpful to outline those broad areas of need, but to consider these bullet points as part of the next step is going to be really important. So these items such as, will the individual be able to demonstrate the skill when asked to do so in a variety of different contexts? What is the level of skill independence? If it's not a consistent independence, identifying where those areas might be needed, where a little bit more support or a little bit more instruction is required. Is this a skill that's performed consistently over time? So the old adage of, if we don't use it, we lose it, can go with skills and things like that in the vein of executive functioning as well, too. If this is a skill, if we're talking about a skill vocationally that's not often encountered, but they can, an individual can work towards that with support in one interval. But if this is an annual thing, or if this is a bill paying thing that happens once a month, is that skill able to be repeated with the same level of independence over time? Are all components of the skill demonstrated? As we've been able to talk about today, executive functioning skills are quite vast. So really making sure that there isn't any gaps, there isn't any areas in which there's the potential to kind of veer off course. That's really critical to assess when we're looking at individual skill levels beyond general assessment, which might only address one function or one snapshot in time. So some additional considerations, I'm just going to check our time here. Some additional considerations is really to look at things in a broader scope. So it's important, and this is on the heels of another discussion that I was able to lead, it's important to kind of look at other areas of concern in the community, such as safety and health and well-being in the broader sense, to make sure that we are really addressing concerns in advance prior to that transition period. It's also going to be very critical to really recognize the areas of strength and, again, incorporate this whenever possible. In recognizing those areas of strength, really playing to those strengths in the work environment, in the socialization opportunities, at least initially, to set up an individual for success. Especially, if you are an individual or an advocate, making sure that these initial interactions, these initial times when we're working to achieve independence, that we have environments set up that are going to be better at facilitating that successful independence and more comfortable for the individual. In terms of support strategies, it's really about continuously evaluating the manner in which they're being applied. How to structure the day is going to vary based on levels of independence and productivity on different days at different times, and making sure there are motivational strategies, whether it be something that's intrinsic or more contrived, or on par with the level of the expectations being set. A big point here that I really want to make sure to mention is to especially for providers and for guardians, to not fall victim to the expectations for everyone fallacy. And really what I mean by that is these very broad notions of this is what being productive should look like. This is what being patient or participating in a conversation meaningfully should look like. So if the expectation in a work environment is that you should be sitting at your desk, on your bottom in the chair, not leaning or moving, that's not going to necessarily be appropriate for everybody. So watching the goals as we prepare individuals for transition to make sure that they are flexible to incorporate what works for the individual. That's more or less what I'm gearing this towards. So, individuals with disabilities might have difficulties with excessive movement, or they might require some additional time to plan and think in a different way or in a different setting. So that on-task behavior is not going to be globally represented as such when we move out of the school setting. So making sure as an individual prepares for that transition that we're modifying our expectations accordingly. In terms of, conversationally and socially, being flexible in the manner in which we're teaching that and are our expectations for what a good, reciprocal, appropriate conversation looks like is going to be a little bit different, again, depending on environment. So modifying our expectation for what that might look like at work versus socially, and programming for that level of generalization as we're teaching the skills initially, and really allowing the opportunity for the individual to have, again, this variety of tools or strategies to apply in different settings. Again, going back to these planning and goals, if we're talking about prior to or anticipating a transition, it's important to begin this process and at least thinking about this process and getting feedback from the individual throughout this process as early as possible so we can plan accordingly. The information that I have bulleted here is going to be derived from multiple sources, most importantly, the extent to which the individual can provide this input to you so that we can really tailor our interventions and the levels of supports needed based on how functional the skill is for the individual, how important is this to the individual and to the family. If the program or the environment, the home setting, if there is a push for different types of goals or directions or focus, then is really important for the individual or the family, that needs to be a conversation that is had so that we can really allocate the resources and the attention and the instruction accordingly. Age appropriate skills, does the individual have prerequisite skills? Those are all things to assess. I feel like when we are working with and supporting individuals who are older, there is the assumption that a lot of the prerequisite skills have already been met. That's often a fallacy that's I widely encounter, and taking a step back to make sure that those prerequisite skills are solidified and the individual's comfortable and we can generalize these skills. It sounds very common sense, but I assure you it's often very much so overlooked. Is the skill that we are teaching in the moment, whether that's in the community or in the more structured setting that precludes the community, does that help with reducing some challenges that might arise, some emotional challenges that might arise, some behavioral challenges? Are we teaching skills that are going to preemptively prevent some of those things from occurring and that distress to arise in a less structured setting? Will these skills lead to more complex skills? We want these skills that we're teaching more explicitly, we have the ability to support more explicitly, to lead to that generalization, to lead to deeper and meaningful conversations and social relationships, additional tasks and projects in the vocational and work setting that can lead to bigger outcomes for the individual. And again, that generalization, this is a very important thing to consider when we're talking about not just executive functioning skills, but executive functioning skills for an older individual who's entering the community. In terms of targeted skills training, when we're talking about when the opportunities do exist to provide more of a scaffolding, more of an intense approach to teaching skills, either in the moment or ahead of time, these are some points of consideration to really take into account. Again, you're going to see the repetition of the role play and inviting practice. Individuals who are going on a job interview, promoting practice opportunities in advance, structuring conversational points to mention, having somebody provide you with that feedback about their performance. Every day, that's something that every human being on the face of this earth, that helps us grow. Every day we're getting that feedback, whether it's from the environment and how we interact with it, or from a person directly, from a self-evaluation perspective. Really making sure that we're teaching skills in isolation initially, and then programming for bigger, broader generalization. When you're teaching skills initially, making sure that they're direct and explicit, like you would teach any other skill, and really ensuring that transfer training is occurring in the real world. So when possible, supporting those individuals, working with them in an isolated setting, and then going to the community to practice that skill, or going online to practice that skill, is going to be a very key component to making sure that we're getting some good solidification of these skills. And then finally, whether or not this applies to everybody, it's something to take into consideration. It's when we're talking about transition, when we're readying for transition, very much so is a team approach. So ensuring that there is still the structure of a team or a support setting once we reach the community is very important. This is beneficial for everyone involved. There should be a high amount of collaboration and communication whenever possible, encouraging active involvement from the individual with whom you're working or supporting, or your family member, to continuously provide feedback and input into what is working, what is not working, where do I need more help, incorporating job coaches or bosses, for that matter, into the fold to see what's of benefit. And really, as a team, coordinating to see where responsibilities should be delineated is going to be essential for making sure that there's intervention at all stages. So instead of coming more intensively from one individual, like an instructor in a school setting, the support's going to be multifaceted and is going to come in a lot of different forms from a lot of different individuals. So when considering when responsibilities should be allocated, when, where, who, what, how, consideration of safety, making sure that everyone is knowledgeable on the common goals and objectives, and not holding an expectation that might not be appropriate for the individual across settings. And of course, knowing what's beneficial for the individual schedules and things like that, that are a big part of their day in advance, is going to help everyone intervene on a deeper level. And of course, the name of the game here is independence. We really want to make sure that we're always striving for that. There's not an over prompting. There's not an overdoing. There's allowing for an opportunity where it's appropriate and where it's safe to fumble a little bit, to learn from it, and to walk through it again in a very supported manner. So the goal is for independence, and to reach those goals, it's important as we move to less and less supports to include more methods to self-evaluate, to make adjustments, and to have just a bevy of resources to go to. So we're really programming for generalization in advance by giving a big toolbox. And remembering to keep things, very simple and concrete, especially with regard to individuals who have significant executive functioning deficits. The extent to which we can minimize the non-essential information is really going to be paramount in keeping things in a very clear and concise manner. So here I have outlined for you a couple strategies and some really essential take-home messages about providing guidance and scaffolding supports as necessary, focusing on positives rather than negatives, really maximizing those areas of strength. A lot of these are going to be, any step towards independence is a positive step towards independence, even if it's a half step. So really making sure to celebrate those independent steps whenever possible, and considering success in the community. Success in the community doesn't necessarily have to result in independence. It can be just positive interactions in these settings with less structured supports. That's certainly something to consider. Continuing to encourage self-advocacy and collaboration with all team members is essential. Making sure that we're really scheduling, either as a team or a one-on-one with the individual, a planning and a check-in time, setting everybody up for success is essential. And then really making sure that there is a focus on, of course, safety, and an incorporation of healthy routines and exercise habits. So beyond just that, this is what we have to do as far as immediate ADLs, self-care, in forms of cleanliness and hygiene, and then getting to work and paying our bills, making sure that the rest of the day, with regard to delineating appropriate leisure time and then appropriate exercise and self-care and healthy habits time, is also incorporated into our transition plan. So I have a few different links here, books, resources, websites, and then I've also included some web-based home device applications. This is just a few, but I assure you there is a ton that are appropriate fits for everyone. So I know I ran a little bit longer, Melanie, but certainly if there's any time to answer questions, I'm happy to do so at this time. And I thank you all for your attention and your investment in recognizing the importance of this stage of life.
Dr. Coleman, thank you so much. We do actually have quite a few questions coming in. Just for anyone who had specific questions in regards to support services and insurance through Behavior Therapy Associates, we won't be addressing those kind of questions on today's webinar, but please feel free. The contact information is on your screen to reach out to them directly for that information. So let's get to it. And again, I see some people are starting to sign off. We are just past our time. Dr. Coleman, if you're okay for about 5 minutes.
Yes. I apologize. It's running a little bit longer.
No, listen, we keep things super informal around here. It was great. All the information that you shared, it was needed. So we're happy that you took the time to do so. So the first question is, I am in need of resources to help with these executive functioning skills as my son is on a waiver and we have been in need of supports for over 2 years. Can you please help us find a practicing BCBA or social worker available? This family lives in Southern New Jersey. Dr. Coleman, just to let you know, I did provide Natalie Trump and myself as CLEP resources to help guide this family. I know sometimes when someone's on a specific waiver, that does pose some restrictions to the supports that they can access directly through that waiver. But if you had any additional suggestions for this family, please feel free.
Sure. I think that in terms of resources in the South Jersey area, there really is a bevy of professionals that you can consider. And I'm sorry, I might have missed it at the beginning. Depending on the age, ability, and the focus of your areas of need, you might want to consider a variety of different individuals to help. Melanie, that was a great suggestion, and to provide your information, I think that can certainly be beneficial. Working with either specifically a BCBA, a psychologist, a job coach, or a life coach, or even a social worker can be of benefit. If you're seeking specific areas, I would make sure that wherever you are exploring, you're looking at the webpage or the information available and making sure that that is, like you would for any therapist, an appropriate fit, or that individual has an area of specialization with regard to your area of specific need. I certainly, I have my information provided here. We do provide services to the South Jersey area, but depending on your specific area of need, I would say, it might be a bigger discussion. And certainly, my contact information is there as to what professional might be appropriate to fit this need. It's a very vast area, but I think certainly any of the professionals that I mentioned can be of help for those skills.
Wonderful. So just to reassure everyone, yes, you will have access to this recording. We will be posting this on the Community Living Education Project's website, along with our YouTube page. And I will, I've already dropped in, if you want to scroll up, a folder or a file, I'm sorry, of the PDF of today's presentation. In addition to that, I will drop it in again before we sign off. I do see someone's asking for one-to-one referrals. Again, a lot of times we have to ask a lot more questions so that we can provide with the right resources, right? Regards to age, is that person still under their school entitlement? Are they in the adult system? Are they on a waiver? Or different scenarios are going to pose, right, different access to different resources. So please feel free. I did drop my contact, Natalie Trump from CLEP's contact. Dr. Coleman shared her contact before. Dr. Coleman, if you would, are you comfortable just dropping your contact into the chat section?
Sure, absolutely. And I'll put that page back up again too while we finish our talk. So that's up as well too. But yes, I can certainly put that information in there.
Here we go. Thank you. So anyone take out your cell phone, take a picture of the screen, screenshot your laptop, or that way you have Dr. Coleman's contact. Someone is saying that they would love for more information about stop and think strategies and how to use apps for that, or alarms or other technology. Any suggestions?
I think that's a great question. It is a very helpful strategy that can be easily generalized to any age, any developmental level, and any ability. There are, of course, applications out there, but I would probably, to make it meaningful for you, whoever is asking the question, I would probably want a little bit more information on those specific areas, each developmental area, and that kind of helps hone either the cue or the response. So the stop and think, especially, if the individuals are relying on it independently in the community, might look a little bit different. This can come in certain phrases. It can be something that's more concrete, that's written out, more like a decision tree, or this can just be some visual strategies that are kind of stopping and thinking about, reflecting on recognizing your own bodily states. So it's a big, broad intervention strategy. I'm sorry, I can't be more direct, but it can be easily facilitated on paper, mentally, or with an application as well.
And can you talk generally about how a student who has not met their goals that relate to self-monitoring after having an aid or a shadow in their 4 years of high school may be able to make a case for additional year of schooling to continue working on in this area? Are deficits in executive functioning areas enough for a parent to advocate that a student should remain for another year before leaving for college? I've seen districts graduate students who still need a lot of help in this area, the comment states. Dr. Coleman?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think that if you're looking at something like just not being able to meet goals, I would really take a step back and evaluate if those goals are even appropriate. As I mentioned, like in the presentation, there could be some issues with just really shaky ground with some of the foundational skills. If some of the foundational skills, for instance, with self-monitoring, aren't solidified. So if an individual isn't able to recognize with themselves and label their own emotional body states as they manifest, anticipating, how they're feeling, or even labeling it after the fact, that might be a skill that has to be more explicitly taught. And the goals should really be modified to reflect that. So I think that as professionals, if we're seeing individuals where they're not meeting any goals, we've not done our due diligence with really evaluating that skill in isolation and whether or not they can even accomplish that skill. So scaling back on the goals to really make sure that we're targeting the interventions at some of those initial skills that compose it. With regard to making a case, if the individual should graduate or not, I think that relating those skills back to essential skills for safety and independence and decision making. If there's certainly area of concerns in that area, that could be something that's a more powerful motivator. I know school districts differ from district to district. So I think really making the case that they are not performing at the level in which it's been reported that they perform, and specifically listing areas of difficulty which relate to their ability to be successful in the next phase is a good place to start.
Perfect. We know that some students are being granted that extra year of school if they're within a certain age bracket, I believe, due to COVID. So I'm not sure if the family's referencing that or not.
Okay.
But if they are and they're not receiving appropriate information from their sending district or from the professionals involved within the school district, I would definitely suggest reaching out to the New Jersey Department of Education. They do have an educational ombudsman that you can ask for. You can just Google that contact, and they may be able to provide you with some more support and information in that area to see if that's appropriate or not. Can you talk about how to deal with anger, frustration, and resistance when someone is challenged in all of the executive functioning areas, and how to get beyond the anger?
Sure. The anger and the frustration, what I would hypothesize is coming from a place of just being unable to, or really struggling with being able to accomplish those tasks in the executive functioning realm that we're talking about. If we're talking about planning, if we're talking about inhibition, if we're talking about selecting their attention. So in terms of evaluating, the whys of the behavior, I would hypothesize again that would come from that place. It could also be coming from different sources. So thorough investigation into, the functions of those behaviors is going to be essential. Aside from that, once we derive some reliable information regarding the functions and we're taking into account potential executive functioning deficits, I think those antecedent interventions really come into play at that stage. So if we're seeing the anger results, the goal would be to interject some antecedent interventions, teaching those skills ahead of time when the individual is happy, when they're relaxed, when they're able to be engaged, to loosely quote Gregory Hanley, is going to be essential. If we're teaching the skills ahead of time, we're teaching the self-regulation components, we're modeling the appropriate language or the appropriate way to kind of remove ourselves from a situation in which we are uncomfortable, we don't want to engage, by requesting to leave or by doing some other type of behavior that's able to be better accepted in the situation, then we are foregoing those behaviors to occur in the future. So I would say, again, taking a step back, working on some of the antecedent interventions, really making sure that the individual has enough planning in advance of things that are anticipated that are coming, that has some go-to strategies on how to work through the periods of frustration and some ways to, and again, depending on the abilities level, the language level, this might be taking a step back and making sure that they can appropriately vocalize, like, I don't want to do this, or this is hard for me, or I need assistance with this, rather than resulting in the aggressive or the upset or tantrum behavior.
Wonderful. Thank you. And so can you please just go through your resource slides again?
Oh, of course.
I know you're looking for some of the assistive technology. Again, everyone get out your phone, screenshot. I did also drop the link for the PDF for Dr. Coleman's slides.
So you'll have these as a PDF. Perfect. But I encourage you to look at the different types because it's not a one size fits all with these. There are areas for suggestion. So if you're finding that an application has too much language or is lacking in the concrete department, really seeking out something that is familiar. And certainly what I have provided is just a teeny tiny snapshot. So make sure that you really kind of talk to your advocates, talk to your support groups to see what they have used, what is working for them as a good place to start.
Wonderful. You are getting numerous messages of thanks coming across. I know that we haven't gotten, I apologize. I know that we haven't gotten to every question. I think we got to most of our general questions that were asked, but Dr. Coleman, thank you again. I greatly appreciate all your time and expertise that you've been willing to share with us for the last 2 sessions. Been very well received. And I think all the information that you've provided has really empowered families and professionals to look further into some additional resources. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. And thank you everybody for the excellent questions. I see a comment here that it could have easily been a 2-hour, it could have been a 4-hour presentation. So if I kind of speeded through a little bit, because there's so much to cover, it's such an area of need, but I thank you everyone for your attention and Melanie for your assistance with the presentation.
No, as always. Again, on behalf of the Community Living Education Project, CLEP, through Rutgers University, and also through Dr. Coleman and Behavior Therapy Associates, we thank everyone for joining us today. At the end of today's session, you're going to see a brief survey that's going to pop up on your screen. It's information that you provide us that allows CLEP to really tailor future information sessions to meet your needs. So take that 30 seconds, really quick, brief survey. If there's any specific topics that you would like to suggest, please feel free to do so. And we thank everyone for joining us. Please be well, be safe, healthy, and feel free to look at the Community Living Education Project's website for upcoming webinar series on self-direction and assistive technology. So thank you very much, everyone. Dr. Coleman, please be well. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.